Hey, and welcome back to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. I'm beyond thrilled today to welcome to the show Jennifer Brand, who is a master's in public health, master's degree, CNS, which if you don't know what that is a clinical nutritionist on par with dietitians, and in some ways has even a more probably integrative and functional type background that is amazing. And then also she's licensed as well. So welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. I'm really excited to be here.
Same. Your niche is so fabulous. I don't want to give too much away. So if it's okay, I'm just going to go ahead and read your bio so everybody can get a little introduction to you. And then we're going to go ahead and get into probably way fewer questions than I would love to have time to ask you, because I know we only have so much time, but we'll get through what we can. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Jennifer is a clinical nutritionist, and she's the CEO of Jennifer Brand Nutrition, LLC. She helps children with dry, flaky, weepy, red, itchy, painful rashes navigate the journey to healthy skin and enjoy a childhood free from disruptive skin symptoms. Instead of managing symptoms with more diet restrictions, environmental changes, and prescription creams, Jennifer uses functional testing and detailed health history to uncover unique imbalances at the heart of the problem and provides a roadmap to restore balance so that your child can eat more foods, feel good in their skin, regain normalcy, and be a child. Jennifer's own struggle with gut problems and disordered eating, made worse with elimination diets, and her father's, brother's, and mother's struggles with psoriasis, eczema, and vitiligo left Jennifer frustrated. Conventional recommendations fell flat and didn't help her or her loved ones get relief from these health problems. These experiences inspired her to search for a different approach, one that addresses the root causes of health problems like these. Jennifer has been a faculty member of Learn Skin, and her work has been featured in peer-reviewed scientific journals, Voyagela, as well as on podcasts, online summits, and in-person presentations at venues such as Casa Colina Hospital in California. Jennifer, you're so amazing.
Thank you so much.
I can't wait to talk to you about this. And for anybody who hasn't really been around a child who has these skin challenges, I encourage you to stay tuned for her website and go to her website and check out some pictures of these kiddos, because we're not just talking about a couple red bumps. I mean, these children they can sometimes have like almost full body rashes. It's extremely painful and uncomfortable for them. And some of your before and after pictures are actually like very incredible. Yeah. And I love how we're so synergistic in the sense of this is what functional medicine is all about, is you found something where the conventional setting isn't finding and addressing the root cause as well. And when you can do that, you can really change lives. So wow. I love it. Maybe you can share a little bit with us about, you have such a unique niche. It sounds like you did have some experience with skin challenges in your family, but how did you end up so focused specifically on skin problems in children?
Well, I ended up so focused on skin issues in children for a combination of reasons. Yes, I had that family history of skin issues with my immediate family, which then also that combined with my personal experience dealing with gut issues and elimination diets and realizing that wasn't the root cause. Food's not the root cause of the problem. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my background, where I was very hyper aware of what's happening on the skin for certain people and how debilitating that can be. And became also very aware that not only the typical interventions and approach in the functional and integrative world, but also conventionally are to start taking foods out of the diet. Yeah. So that ended up going way downhill for me, ended up really struggling with eating disorders. And, having to come back from that. And then when I became a clinical nutritionist, I used to have a corporate job. So when I stopped doing that, became a clinical nutritionist many years ago. And nutrition has always been my passion. Like I studied this way back in college, into public health for a while. Couldn't deny that this is really my passion. So, went back to school and became a CNS. So anyways, started doing this, one of the first connections I made was just with a local ENT office here in Los Angeles. And I started seeing children. And I started seeing children and talking to them, parents, about like getting their tonsils out, some more conventional type nutrition work.
Yeah.
And then a colleague of mine at the time specializes in adult skin issues. And I was seeing children, and she doesn't see children. She asked if I wanted to see, children with the rashes, because she was getting a lot of requests for that. So I was like, absolutely. So I kind of, it was an interesting combination of my background, and at the same time, it was sort of just like, this happened, and the two, I don't think, were really connected, other than the universe sort of connected the dots for me.
Yeah.
And I ended up really just absolutely loving this work, and helping these parents get the transformation for their children that they dream of. And I, as a young child too, I had some things where I just felt different from other children, and kids can be really cruel and mean, and people stare, of that nature. So I always really had a soft spot for children that, might feel that way as well. And children shouldn't have to grow up that way, so it's sort of too, like, I want to be that support for these children, the kind of support that, my parents, I didn't know I needed or even existed back then. I want to be that support for these children as well.
Oh my gosh, it's so needed. There's so many children that struggle with this, and increasing incidents, and so few of them have access to any type of approach other than the conventional approach you described, that's basically Band-Aid solutions like creams and things, or even do try to get an integrative sort of non-conventional approach, then often they're put on these restrictive diets. And that's one of the things I'm hearing loud and clear from you, is that, like, red flag, this is so risky for them. Can you share a little bit more about, like, what types of elimination diets are you, like, talking about that you see the most, and what are some of the risks of those?
So most of the time, I would say, by the time my clients find me, they are on already restrictive diets. At a minimum, they're on like a whole real foods diet. They've already cut out all the junk food. A lot of them have tried, removing gluten, dairy, some of the basics. And they're also just relying on these steroid creams, which can be problematic, if used long-term and appropriately. And none of this solves the problem. But from that dietary perspective, I'm seeing these kids on very restrictive diets. And what happens is that we start to lack nourishment, because when we go on an elimination diet, typically the symptoms might improve for a little bit. And so then it's like, okay, well, that was helpful. The symptoms come. Okay, well, let's take this out now. Okay, we got some improvement. The symptoms come back. So the diet tends to get smaller and smaller, because food is the root cause of the problem, right? So we on these diets that are getting smaller and smaller. And for children, they are growing and developing. They're like little athletes. They're active. And right. And certainly when we have rashes like eczema and these things happening on the skin, we need even more nourishment to heal. So pound for pound, I mean, like, kids need more nourishment compared to adults. And here we are, a diet that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I have seen rashes get worse when the diet gets smaller and smaller, because now the body doesn't have the fuel it needs to do everything it's supposed to do, let alone heal. I have seen a lot of these children become underweight. A lot of these children at extremely young ages are developing fear of food and disordered eating habits. And this whole process causes so much stress and anxiety for parents. And there's actually like a lot of research studies on this that show that, parents that are implementing these elimination diets for their children, like, do really suffer with higher levels of anxiety and depression compared to parents that aren't dealing with this. And the bottom line of all of this is that it's really not the root cause of the problem.
100%. I mean, so actually, this reminds me of a few years ago, I got recruited to work as a consultant for a company that wanted to develop an app and a program to help people who have psoriasis and eczema. And we did a whole little cohort on it. And so that's my aside from just the one-on-one clients that I happen to get my practice with that, I had such an interesting experience through doing this whole cohort. And the diet elimination was such a small piece of that. And so I'm just dying. I'm going to ask you the $1 million question right now. What to you is really the root cause or the root causes of these skin problems?
So the root cause, the primary root cause of the problem, certainly when we're talking about rashes like eczema, psoriasis, all of it, yes, there can be some external triggers, of course, but the root cause are imbalances, internal imbalances, and primarily imbalances in the gut microbiome. So what I see happening is that when we have imbalances in the gut, so that can be, we've got all kinds of microbes in there. There's like bacteria and fungi and parasitic things and viral things, and they're all supposed to be in there. It's a hostile environment. That's just the way it is. But when these things get out of balance, it starts to create irritation and inflammation in the gut, which impacts the gut lining. And so the lining of the gut is really thin. It's like one cell layer thick. I always do my little, so it's kind of like this for people watching. And so when we start to get that irritation and inflammation in there, it starts to go like this.
Yeah.
So when that happens, things that are in the gut that are not supposed to get out, that are too large to be in the bloodstream, get out into the bloodstream. This triggers the immune system to start freaking out and it reacts. And then in some people, and it kind of like if people are predisposed, to certain things, like, yes, there's a genetic component and all that. But anyway, in a lot of people, this results in rashes on the skin. So when this is happening, yes, food particles are getting out and triggering the immune system. So this is where our food sensitivities come from.
Yeah.
So the important thing to remember, though, is that the food sensitivities are happening because this is already happening, right?
Yeah.
So healing this up and resolving the imbalances there is really what needs to happen. The other thing I really like to point out too, it's not just food particles that are getting out, it's toxins from all of these microbes. And one of the most interesting things that I find is that, like, when we're talking about food sensitivities, which are those IgG food reactions, so they're not life-threatening. They just cause all of these awful symptoms in people. But so when our food sensitivities tend to be delayed, so usually like after somebody eats something, if they have a food sensitivity, they might get symptoms like, up to a few days later, but typically it's like heightened within a few hours. And so when that happens at the same time, that's also the peak time for what's called endotoxemia. So when we eat in general, that also creates a die-off of those microbes, which means there's more toxins, which means there's more of those in the bloodstream too. So that also happens a few hours after eating. So is it the food or is it the endotoxins, right?
Yeah.
And so who knows? We don't really know. So this is why we can't really blame food and why we really need to look at what's happening in the gut and resolve those imbalances in there, get this all tightened up so that that process stops happening.
Yes, 100%. I was just talking with Melissa, my intern, who's watching right now, recently about the more you understand what you just said about the gut, intestinal permeability, metabolic endotoxemia, inflammation that it drives, and the connections that has to skin, mental health, risk of metabolic syndrome, weight gain, hormonal imbalances. To me, it kind of becomes, there's nothing else that makes sense to really focus on other than gut health, almost no matter what problem you want to help people with, because it is the power of this isn't just some scientific idea that might be impacting some people. It's profoundly impacting the vast majority of people in the Western world at increasing rates. And that's why we do see higher rates of the skin problems you're talking about, higher rates of autism, higher rates of obesity and anxiety. It's all connected to this problem. So it's happening on, it kind of blows my mind sometimes, that like the scale that this is unfolding on, but almost invisibly.
It's huge. And something also that I like to remind people is, like, when we're talking about leaky gut or that gut hyperpermeability, that same tissue, that same like lining of the gut is the same kind of tissue that's in the lungs, it's in the brain, it's under the skin.
Yeah.
So this is why it's not that leakiness, that inflammation, it's not just happening in the gut, it's happening throughout the body. So this is why, like autism, like you're saying, the metabolic syndrome, all of these other types of conditions all stem from this hyperpermeability of these membranes throughout the body. And, and that's what we really need to work on, sort of stopping that inflammation and stopping that process. And, some of the other reasons why this is happening, of course, like our environmental things impact what's happening with the microbes throughout our body. Those microbes are super important for keeping us healthy. And there's so much research on this now in the literature. Like if anybody wants to go to Google Scholar and start typing in, microbiome and whatever condition you're curious about, and something will pop up. It just will. That, so what these microbes really need is, well, number one, they feed off of prebiotic foods. So fiber foods, complex carbohydrates, starchy, non-starchy vegetables. Our diets have become more void of these types of foods. Just as an example, like what we're putting in our bodies don't feed our microbes as much. There's this analogy, and I find it so interesting. I forgot where I heard this, but I always think of it as our bodies are really we're a hollow tube, from the mouth to bottom down there, right? Things grow around this tube. So inside the tube, it's a very hostile environment. And there's like, all the bacteria and acid and all of this stuff. And all of that stuff in there extracts the nutrients from what we put in and feeds the tissues, right? So it's just a different way to kind of look at the body. And we really have to feed what's happening in that tube if we want our tissues to thrive.
Yeah, your gut is the interface between you and the world, and you need to get your nutrition from the world as well as information via proteins about what's dangerous and what's safe and what the environment is. And so it's all happening across this membrane. And so it shouldn't be that surprising to us that we have such an epidemic of these chronic health problems if we know that the Western diet comes in around half of the daily fiber needs, which indicates the low intake of the fermentable fibers that you're talking about that keep that microbiome healthy. And so of course that we have problems because we don't have a good interface with the world that it's happening in the natural way that it should. Yeah.
And
what if we
sorry. Well, I was going to say, and just as an example, like, when we feed those microbes, these fermentable fibers, the prebiotic foods, what they do is make what's called short chain fatty acids. Those short chain fatty acids are what communicate with the immune system and many other parts of the body and keeps inflammation in check. A primary one is butyrate. And, that in particular also helps like seal this up. It's important for this too. And so when we're not eating the right types of foods and we're not getting these short chain fatty acids, we end up with greater sources of inflammation in the body because it goes unchecked.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so good. What do you say to the parent who says, like, look, I have an infant with severe eczema, and obviously this infant is breastfed and they haven't had a chance to eat the low fiber American diet. They're not even started on solids. How did this happen? What do you say to that question?
Oh, it's such a good question. I'm often asked, how did this happen? My baby's exclusively breastfed and, I eat a healthy diet. I think a lot of it does tend to be environmental. A lot of it tends to be, what's happening with mom. I have seen all sorts of combinations in my practice. Like, yes, I've seen babies that are formula fed, born C-section, exposed to antibiotics, all of that.
Classic, that you would expect. Yeah.
I have a lot of those types of clients, but I also have just this family that everything was perfect. Born, exclusively breastfed for like ever, no antibiotics, anywhere, but they still develop rashes like eczema. Why that is, I can't really say.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is a genetic component which makes somebody more susceptible to developing something like eczema. Um, we all have wonky genes. We just do. And sometimes they get turned on and sometimes they don't. Like, I'll say this, I'm like knocking on wood right now, but my dad
Yeah.
and my mom have psoriasis. My mom has vitiligo and eczema. I get hives periodically. Okay. But I'm just like, so I have the genes. Why
Yeah.
have that genes not gotten turned on for me? I don't know. But so there's an external trigger that does turn that on. And then it's that downstream effect where we start to get symptoms. A lot of the little kids that I see, once I do start, because part of the process is, a really in-depth intake. And sure, babies, I see kids that are less than a year old, they don't have a lot of history, but I do start inquiring, like, what's going on with mom? What's going on with the parents? And for example, there's one family I'm working with now. We're just starting to work together. And, it finally came out in all my questioning. Well, dad has a history of H. pylori, like conventionally medically treated H. pylori. So it was pretty severe.
Yeah.
H. pylori, for example, is an imbalance. It's we pretty much everybody has some H. pylori in their guts. When it overgrows, it becomes a problem. I see it in a lot of kids with rashes. It's one of those things that's very easily transmitted between family members. So we share our microbiomes with people that we live with and people that we're close with. So that's an example too. So in that kid, for example, we did see H. pylori in the testing that we did for him. So I wasn't surprised to see that. Another common thing that can be passed between family members are fungal findings. Candida is a big one. So saying all this too, I also want to mention, because I know a lot of parents have a lot of guilt about what's happening with their child. There's no guilt. Like, everybody, of course, we do the best we can with the information we have. And some kids just wind up with eczema. But there is something that can be done about it, which is not the elimination diet, not the continued use of the creams and medications, which, by the way, are fine to use. That's what they're there for. If they're used safely and as prescribed and, intermittently, just follow your doctor's instructions. They can really help get over the hump, while you're working to figure out what the root cause is.
I love that so much. The way that you create a really kind and safe place for parents, because as you said, I think we have a similar positioning in the sense of, like, we're established experts. So we tend to attract people who are a little bit more complex and who already tried kind of the basic things. And so we do tend to work more in that space of, okay, you might not be the classic, more simple case where it's like real obvious what happened here and what to do, but there's probably a combination of, like, your genetics, that obviously the parents can't control that, a little bit of like epigenetics that is like impossible to finally control. And then there's just the exposome, or the world around us, where we have like hygiene that's like on overdrive. And so the world is overly sterile, and that can threaten the development of the microbiome. And none of that is under the parent's control. Or if, like, a mom was given antibiotics during her delivery and told that, like, if she doesn't get it, her baby might die, it's like, well, she probably made the best choice in that moment. And if there's some eczema on the back end, like, you deal with it. Yeah.
Antibiotics are life-saving. So, it's like, if your doctor tells you need a medication, I'm just like, take the medication.
Yeah.
You don't try to get around that. It can be really an important part of the healing journey. It's interesting too, because with some parents, they're just like, but my diet has been great. Our diets have been great. What's going on? Another thing that's happened environmentally is that, even if we eat like the healthiest, like cleanest food, organic, whatever it is, the soil, like, our food sources are not as nutritious, not as nutritionally dense as they used to be generations ago.
Right.
Our soil is depleted. Like, this is where the foods that we eat get minerals. So the plants get it from the soil, Animals get it from the plants they eat.
Yeah.
We get it from the plants and animals that we eat. But, you know, our soil is depleted, like, and
Yeah.
it's got toxin things in it now. And so it's more likely that we're getting, you know, these contaminants into our body, as well as lower levels of really critically important nutrients.
Exactly. And not to mention, like, a couple other things are like, one, hey, pesticides are a thing. Guess what? They also get on organic crops. And guess what? It's not a parent's fault if they can't afford 100% organic food all the time. Who can, right?
Yeah, you know, like I do what I can. And they have
Yeah.
the environmental working group has the Dirty Dozen and the Clean
Mhm.
15 for anybody that doesn't know about that. And so it's the 12 foods that are like produce wise that typically tend to be the most contaminated. So those are the
Yeah.
ones that are more important to buy organic. So,
Mhm.
you know, especially like if you aren't able to go completely organic, take a look at that list. That can be
Yeah.
really helpful. Yeah.
Exactly. I happily buy my conventional pineapple and avocado, knowing it's pretty safe. So, yes.
And the other thing too, like even if you can't, you know, get everything organic, you know, wash your produce. And
Mhm.
especially like if you're going to eat the skin on it, just do a little more washing of it, you know, like with
Yeah.
potatoes or what have you. Yeah.
Yeah. I love just, I feel like this whole world is so like unknown to so many people. Or like another thing I thought of is just the way that your microbiome is you inherit that, and it's pretty well established between the age of 2 and 3. And so maybe you are a mom who ate perfectly your whole life and had a baby with eczema, but maybe you inherited a poor microbiome from your mom that grew up in the 60s eating like Wonder Bread sandwiches and
Yeah.
like I don't even know bologna like every day. So there's so many factors out of a parent's control that it's good that you create that sort of like no shame environment for them.
Right. I love that you just mentioned too that the gut microbiome does become mature around 2 to 3 years of age.
Yeah.
And before that, there's kind of like a thumbprint that happens.
Mm.
So after that, it becomes harder to like manipulate and change it.
Yeah.
So I really do like working with kids as young as possible because we have a greater opportunity to really, it's a little bit easier to rebalance what's happening in there
Yeah.
before that time. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I know this is such a loaded question because if you ask me my process with XYZ, I could probably spend hours if I really wanted to. But maybe like imagine that I'm a parent saying, hey, I'm thinking about bringing my baby to you. Can you overview your process for me of like how do you work with family? What does the process look like? Is it possible to kind of share that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy
Okay.
to share it. Because I think it's important for parents and for people in general to understand that this is not something that can be resolved with an elimination diet. It's not something that can be, you know, resolved with steroid creams. Like, you know, nobody has these rashes because, you know, they're eating too many green vegetables, you know, or like whatever it is that people are taking out of the diet. So my process involves essentially 4 steps, and there's kind of like a fifth supportive step. But you know, number one is nourish. We need to make sure that your child has the nourishment that their bodies need to do everything it's supposed to do. So grow, develop, function, thrive, and repair, especially repair healthy skin. So it's like the opposite of an elimination diet. We need to
Yeah.
make sure the right foods, like as many as possible, are getting in. Because also, the more diverse the diet is, that promotes a more diverse gut microbiome, and diversity in there promotes better health as well. So, number one, we need to nourish. Number two, immune. So, we need to work on that underlying inflammation that's happening when we have something like eczema or other rashes going on externally. And so this one was interesting to me. I started like including this immune step probably like last year or the year before. So there is nutrient testing that we can do on kids. It's like a urine based test, and it looks mostly at, because it's urine based, so it's like a short term, like, you know, the previous
Is it like an
uh,
organic acids test or, you know?
organic acids, but this one it's called metabolomics. It's
Oh
the
yeah, from Genova. Yeah.
And so I like that because it includes the organic acids, and which, if people don't know what this is, it helps us understand if somebody has all of the vitamins and minerals, so the micronutrients that the body needs to do everything it's supposed to do, because all of these micronutrients help run all of the different biochemical processes in the body. So I started doing these nutrient testings on kids, and we can do that at 2 years old and up. The other test, we can talk about that too. You can do that at any age. But anyway, so with the nutrient testing, I was seeing across the board, and I was just like floored when I started seeing it, but low levels of critical nutrients, in particular antioxidants. So, and then if you kind of back it up and think about it, okay, antioxidants, number one, are found mostly in like fruits and vegetables. A lot of kids aren't eating a lot of vegetables, certainly, right? Because picky eaters, so we're dealing with that. And so antioxidant nutrients combat oxidative stress. Oxidative stress causes inflammation. Inflammation is an underlying issue with all kinds of health conditions, and certainly with something like eczema or psoriasis. So when we've got the rashes, it becomes like this vicious cycle. There's a lot of inflammation happening, which means there's a lot of oxidative stress. We need more antioxidants. And those are typically missing. So it's like, okay, so immune, we need to make sure that we've got these antioxidant nutrients. So some of that, yes, is also diet related, making sure those are getting in, but also throughout this process, and I want to mention this too, like the types of imbalances that we're talking about are not something that can be resolved with diet alone. So there are supplements that I include for each of these types, each of the steps. So the immune is the second one. Detoxification is really important. We need to make sure that these toxins that these gut bugs are creating are getting out instead of like continuing to flare things and trigger the immune system. So we need to make sure detox pathways are open. This is not juicing. It's not cleansing. That's not how the liver right?
Supporting with the nutrients that are needed to run your innate pathways that you have. Yes.
Exactly. The liver runs off of nutrients from foods we eat, vitamins and minerals, amino acids. So we need to make sure that the right things are getting in, and we can do things with supplements to help bind toxins to help them get out. And then the fourth component, which is really the most important, is actually, they're all really important, but the one that is where we get really the change in that transformation is gut. And so we talked in the beginning about those imbalances in the gut microbiome. So we need to find out what those are. We do that with functional testing, and it's a comprehensive digestive stool test. And that allows us to see what's happening in the gut microbiome, identify what those imbalances are, and then we can use supplements to resolve them. So those are really the four most important steps in my process that I work through with my clients to help get that transformation that happens on the skin.
Yes. Okay. I love it. And it sounds like you would move through these, like, you don't start them all four at the same time. You move through them in a sequence.
I start off in the way that I describe them. So so we start with nourish to make sure the body can do everything it's supposed to do. Start working on the immune system, help calm down that inflammation, make sure the detox pathways are open. Then we start implementing the gut work. And then we kind of work through them all together, like implement them, in a stepwise fashion. And then at a point, we are working on them all together. But you got to start in one place. And then I find that the order of operations here is also really important to help the body. It's about supporting the body so that it can do what it's supposed to do. And I find that order helps get the best results for my clients.
Same, because even though I don't specialize in skin, I still specialize in the gut. And what I almost think about, what you made me think about is like the reverse of that. I end up talking a lot with people about like, how did I develop all these problems with my gut health? And often it started with nutritional problems. And then those nutritional problems help to precipitate the gut problems, because it's so, you've got to maintain that tissue. You've got to have the nutrients that, as you said, create the short chain fatty acids, feed the healthy gut bacteria. And then you need that healthy immune system that really depends on nutrition in order to regulate and meter what it attacks versus how calm it is versus how aggressive it is. And when all that gets thrown off, it allows, not only does it threaten the levels of healthy bacteria, but then now you have basically like open real estate for the unhealthy bacteria to come in and grow and grow unencumbered by a compromised immune system. And so I talk the same way with people. Like, look, if you don't get the foundation in place of having your nutritional status adequate, you could do all this expensive gut testing and expensive and difficult gut work, and it can all be for nothing because your foundation isn't there. You can't build a house on sand. So yeah, I think about it the same way.
Yeah. And I love that analogy too. This is the foundation. And yeah, if there are cracks in your foundation, your house is going to fall down. So yeah, and you're exactly right. You can't start here when you need to fix things down here. So you really do have to build up.
Yeah, I love that a lot. Do you get much pushback from parents ever saying things like, oh, my kid doesn't have digestive problems, so I'm sure that's not the issue, or things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some parents, I think by the time people find me, they are somewhat familiar with the gut microbiome and explored my approach of it. But a lot of the clients, a lot of the kids that I see don't have any gut symptoms, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, why are you looking at the gut if there are no gut symptoms? So of course they explain, everything that we're talking about. And so they start to understand the importance of what's happening in there. But, when you really start to explore, and this is why the detailed intakes are so important, that we understand the history of what's happening with someone, because a lot of these kids, maybe had colic when they were really young, or did struggle with constipation, or, did have like really horrible poops when they were super small, so there tend to be some signs of something going on in the gut, even in the absence of like current, because people I think of gut symptoms like, oh, well, she's not in pain, they're not, XYZ, but there are some more subtle signs. And I think that, once people start to, once I help them connect the dots, they're like, oh, okay, and then the light bulbs go on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's amazing. One thing that you brought up that I really love too is just the fact that when you have food sensitivities, that is a real thing for some people, but it's something that's coming from the intestinal permeability, that comes from the nutritional and gut imbalances. And so maybe you can tell me a little bit more about, like, for me, this is often a discussion I have to have with people around, okay, do you do food sensitivity testing? And if so, at what phase in the process would you do that? And do you find that to be helpful?
Yeah, so I do not recommend food sensitivity testing. I find that what it typically does is scare parents and makes them want to take foods out of the diet. Yeah. So what I typically see, and a lot of people have had that testing done, so they'll bring it to me when we start working together. Often it's a lot of red flags, a lot. And when there's a lot of them, that's absolutely, okay, you've got gut hyperpermeability. This is stop taking foods out of the diet. There's no way, because some of these tests have 90 some odd foods on them, right? It's like, you can't not eat. This is not the root cause of the problem.
Right.
So what I do let people know, though, is that if there are foods, because of course, sometimes some people just know, oh yeah, this is triggering. As soon as they eat it, they get hives, they get red, whatever it is. Okay, if you can ID that a food is triggering, it makes sense to keep it out while you're working to resolve the root cause of the problem. That's totally fine. But we just get stuck in this vicious cycle, like, oh, it might be this, it might be that, it might be, or oh, avocado's triggering. Well, it's high histamine. I'm just going to take all histamines out of the diet.
Right.
People just start to go down this rabbit hole that with all of those problems. So I don't recommend food sensitivity testing. So what I do recommend, and really my primary go-to test, is a comprehensive digestive stool test, which shows us what's happening in the gut microbiome and will show us why foods might be triggering in the first place. And so it's those imbalances that need to be resolved. to not just get results on the skin. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, of the work that I do, is to help these kids get that transformation to have healthy skin. But doing that work internally also helps to resolve food reactions and food sensitivities.
Yeah, I love it. That's my most ordered test as well for almost any problem. So,
Anything you have, like we were talking about before, you have to start with the gut. It is the foundation. It's absolutely the foundation. Mhm.
yeah. Do you like the Genova one as well, or do you use a different lab for yours?
I usually go with the GI map from Diagnostic Solutions.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. My second favorite is the GI Effects from Genova. I think
Yeah.
to do a really good job of providing the detail that we need to really help to create a plan that's really going to make a difference and help someone. There are others out there that are less detailed.
Yeah.
I can still use them to create a plan, and I have successfully, and help people get results, but it doesn't, like, some of them don't just have as much detail. Something else I want to mention too, the direct to consumer tests that are out there, who will remain nameless, but if you're just looking online and find these that you're going to get yourself and they give you a report, no.
Yeah.
Those
Just
not,
no.
yeah, no, it's not a good use of resources. Save it for the professional grade test. Work with a practitioner to get it
Yeah.
done, because otherwise you're really just throwing away money.
100%. Not only is the test not very good, but man, I wish I had $1 for everybody that came into my practice and already had a really good professional stool test done, and nothing came of it because the practitioner didn't know what to do with it. And so it really is so much more than the test. It's the key thing to find is the person that knows what to do with your test, because that is such a developed skill.
You
Yeah.
You're so right. And I see that a lot. People come to me with the right test, right? They've got the right test. And I ask, okay, well, what was recommended based on this? And they tell me, and I'm like, that's not going to work, or, it doesn't exactly, like, it's not the right person. You
Yeah.
really need to find somebody that knows how to interpret the results to create a plan for you that's going to work for you, which is also why it's really important to work with somebody that does have a specific niche, something that you're looking for that has gotten good results in other clients, because it can show you that, okay, this person knows with the testing, how to interpret it, how to create an actionable plan around it.
100%. Okay, I love it. I hope you don't mind me asking you really open-ended questions. So just take this wherever you want to go. But let's imagine that I have a child who has some eczema. Maybe I don't have the resources to work with you. Can you give me a few things? I mean, we've hit on a few things already of like, try to look at the clean 15, dirty dozen, try to get fibers into my kid. Any other kind of like big picture, maybe even like supplements or like nutrient dense foods or like lifestyle or environment things that I should really focus on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if somebody doesn't have the resources to work with me one-on-one, I am working on developing some group programs. So those will be coming
Cool.
soon. But I think a good place to start is nourishment. Make sure that the right nutrients are getting in. A big piece of that is quality, complete proteins. Animal proteins are complete proteins. They
Yeah.
contain all of the essential amino acids and conditionally essential amino acids that the body needs to build every single structure in the body down to the cellular level,
Yeah.
including building and repairing healthy skin. So often I have my clients on a high quality beef based protein powder. Collagen.
Not some weird like Frankenstein combination of like gluten and soybean oil that's covered in pesticides. Is
No,
that not what I should be doing?
go figure. So yeah, so something like a high quality, beef based hydrolyzed type protein.
Yeah.
Um, Collagen also is
Mhm.
another really important source of some more specific amino acids
Yep.
for skin health, also for gut healing.
Yeah.
Vitamin D, a good multivitamin are some
Mhm.
ideas. And of course, making sure that the diet is as varied and complete as possible, and we're not restricting unnecessarily any food groups or categories of foods. For immune, making sure antioxidant nutrients are getting in. Vitamin C is always a really great place to start. I love vitamin C because, of course, it's going to support a healthy immune system. It's also natural antihistamine. So
I was going to say, and histamine, yes.
Natural histamine, it's needed for
but I'm on a low histamine diet, so I can't have citrus because it's a histamine liberator.
Yeah.
The slippery slope.
It is. Like vitamin C supplement, can be okay. And actually, there's some vitamin C, because if people are really sensitive to histamine, like if the ascorbic acid can be triggering to people, there's a couple products out there. One, it's like they have vitamin C that's like sourced from tapioca.
Yeah.
So that can be an option for people that are really sensitive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then for detox, just making sure, again, the amino acids and the micronutrients from the diet are really important so that the liver can function the way it's supposed to. And then gut, a really good place to start is with the probiotic. I recommend a spore-based probiotic versus bacterial strains. I tend to find that the bacterial strains, I don't get as good results. So I like the spore-based probiotics. And also some of the research that I've seen more recently is really showing that the bacterial strains just don't make it down to the gut, which is like the large intestine or the colon. It doesn't make it down there because, we were talking about how hostile the environment is to like in that tube. So, and I mean, think about it too, like so many of these bacterial strain probiotics need to be refrigerated. Yeah. How are they going to make it through stomach acid if they have to be kept in the refrigerator,
Yeah, exactly.
So, and not to say, like, I do have some clients that take bacterial strain probiotics in addition to a spore. You can mix them up. And some people do like have better bowel movements or whatever it is when they're on the bacterial strain. So it's not saying that they're totally inappropriate or don't help with anything at all. But I do find when we're trying to get that information on the skin, that spore-based probiotic is a really important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I mean that's another good reason to get the gut test, because those two things are going to do different things. So like what I find is a lot of times if we have a high amount of like unhealthy bacteria and we need to make the environment less hospitable to those, a spore-based option is going to be really well suited to that. Whereas if you have low short chain fatty acids, low commensal bacteria, I'll see better returns on the traditional probiotic. And sometimes it is a combination of the two, or there's a phase of one and the phase of other. So again, it's just such a developed skill to work on someone's gut with them. And the approach just can't really be one size fits all. It's so individual. So it's cool that you have found that same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's hard to, beyond like those are kind of the basics, like some of the core things that I work through with people. But beyond that, like it ends up customized to what's happening, with their test results, what's happening with their lifestyle, with their current diets. So it really is individualized, which is why I think, a lot of people get into a lot of frustration and confusion because you see all this stuff online that like promises, X, Y, Z. And it's like, hey, take this one supplement or eat this one food.
Yeah.
A lot more complicated than that. Which is why, so I can understand people get frustrated and confused and think that the sort of thing doesn't work and, what have you. And just, know that it's a lot more complicated than it appears, in some of these claims. Like if it sounds too good to be true, it is.
I'm just going to go to Walgreens, get me a little Everlywell IgG test, take that, to cut a bunch of foods out and like call it a day. I'm just kidding.
Problem solved.
And then I'll come work with you and actually solve it.
Exactly.
Jennifer, I could talk to you all day, but I know we only have so much time. I am sure that a lot of people are going to want to connect with you and see more of what you're doing and reach out to potentially get help. Where would you like people to head over and find more about you?
Yeah, so my website, it's jenniferkarenbrandnutrition.com. The Karen is spelled Caryn. That's my middle name. My parents named me Jennifer, which is not creative at all. So they threw in a confusing middle name for people.
Hey, at least it was the middle and not the first one.
Exactly. So jenniferbrandnutrition.com. And so that's where you can learn more about me, about my approach. I also have, and I think we could probably put a link somewhere, but I have a free guide bundle. So I have 2 free guides. One is called Tips to Ditch the Itch. So one of the other sort of more external things that I work with my clients on are trying to find ways to manage the symptoms, because when we're doing all of this internal work, like this, it takes time,
It takes
right?
time. Yeah.
So, you know, there are things that we can do externally, topically. So I have a guide about that, and it's a compilation of things that have worked for many of my clients over the years. Everybody's different. So you'll see, and there's a lot of stuff. So, you know, there are different things that you can try. And then it comes along with another free guide that I have. It's called The Probiotic Mistake. So the other thing with the probiotics, with some of the bacterial strains, another reason why I don't often recommend them is that some of those strains are histamine producers, histamine liberators.
Yes.
A lot of the over-the-counter probiotics that you buy, like at Walgreens, wherever, have these in it that can actually make symptoms worse. So if you have given your kid a probiotic that you just got at the store and you're like, oh, this made things worse, probiotics don't work, it's the wrong probiotic.
Yes.
Yeah. So those 2 guides, so that the probiotic guide lists ones, so it'll list the strains to avoid and then also bacterial ones to try. And it also talks more about the spore-based probiotics too. So people can find a link to that.
I love it. So tips to ditch the itch.
Yep. And then
mistake. I'm being so enticed by the titles of those. I can't wait to go look at them. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. We'll make sure to link all that in the show notes. And I just loved connecting with you. And let's reach out again sometime and do a part 2.
Absolutely. I would love it. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun talking to you today.
You as well. Talk to you later.